I watched the security guard's hand move toward his radio, and I realized I had maybe 30 seconds before the police arrived. The boutique manager stood behind the counter with her phone already out, recording, her face twisted in disgust as she looked me up and down. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for shoplifters," she announced loudly enough for the other customers to hear, as if I'd been caught stuffing designer bags under a threadbare coat. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't shoplifting. I was about to buy the entire store. But nobody believed me yet. Nobody ever did. Let me back up. A month earlier, everything was exactly as it should have been, or at least that's what I told myself every morning when I looked in the mirror. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a lawyer. A good one, actually, though you wouldn't know it from how I was being treated in that boutique. But before we get to the humiliation, I need you to understand how I got here. How a man with a Harvard law degree, a 7-figure salary, and a Park Avenue apartment ended up being escorted out of a designer store in the Tribeca neighborhood by a security guard who wouldn't even make eye contact. My wife, Catherine, had left for her mother's place in Connecticut that morning. She did this every third weekend, packed a small bag, kissed me on the forehead with the kind of distant affection you'd show a houseguest, and disappeared for 2 days. I never questioned it. We'd been married for 16 years. We had the rhythm down. She'd leave. I'd order Thai takeout, catch up on work, maybe watch something on HBO without her constant commentary about the cinematography. By Sunday evening, she'd return smelling faintly of her mother's lavender sachets, and we'd resume our lives like bookends closing around the same empty space. That particular Saturday morning, I decided to do something spontaneous. Catherine had mentioned, weeks ago in that casual way she had of dropping hints, that she needed a new coat. Something elegant. Something from that boutique on Broadway, the one with the minimalist window display and the price tags that made me wince. I'd made a mental note. It was the kind of gesture that might remind her why she married me, back when I was the kind of man who did spontaneous things. I showered, dressed in what I thought was presentable attire, dark jeans, a crisp white button-down, my leather jacket that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, and headed downtown. The November sun was weak, filtered through the glass towers, and the streets were crowded with weekend shoppers. My phone buzzed with emails from junior associates, but I ignored them. This was going to be my morning. The boutique was called Éclat, which apparently meant something sophisticated in French. I'd looked it up on the subway. Inside, everything was cream and pale wood and carefully curated emptiness. A single dress on a mannequin. One pair of shoes on a marble pedestal. Classical music played from invisible speakers. It was the kind of place where your breathing seemed too loud. A woman approached me almost immediately, young, probably mid-20s, with that particular kind of beauty that comes from spending significant money on skincare. Her smile froze when she registered my appearance. I watched it happen in real time. The calculation, the dismissal, the decision to treat me as if I were invisible. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, but her tone suggested she was hoping I'd say no and leave. "I'm looking for a coat," I said, keeping my voice level. "An elegant one, something classic." She nodded slowly, as if I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics. "Our coats are in the back section. They're quite exclusive. Most of our clientele orders ahead." The word clientele hung in the air between us like an accusation. I walked to the back section. The coats were displayed like art installations, each one on its own hanger, each one priced between $2,000 and $5,000. I picked one out. A camel-colored wool coat with a silk lining, impeccably tailored. It was exactly what Catherine would like. Exactly what Catherine deserved, frankly, given how little I'd been paying attention to her lately. I brought it to the counter. The manager was helping another customer, a woman in a perfectly coordinated outfit with a designer bag and shoes that matched. She didn't even glance at me. I waited. And waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Other customers came and went. The younger sales assistant helped an older woman with a pair of shoes. The manager continued her conversation with her preferred client, laughing at something the woman said, their intimacy palpable. Finally, I spoke. "Excuse me, I'd like to purchase this coat." The manager turned. Her expression was the kind I'd encountered dozens of times in my life, that flicker of assumption quickly covered by a practiced smile. "Of course," she said, but her movements were slow, reluctant. "Let me just help Mrs. Chen finish up, and then I'll be with you." Mrs. Chen took another 10 minutes to decide on her shoes. When she finally left, the manager returned to me, but not before I caught the eye roll she exchanged with her assistant. "That coat is lovely," she said, turning it over in her hands as if inspecting it for damage. "It's quite an investment. Do you have a credit card with us? We offer a membership program." I pulled out my American Express Black Card. I watched her eyes widen, just barely, before she schooled her features back into professional neutrality. But then something shifted. She glanced at my jacket again, at my jeans, at the scuffed edge of my leather shoes where I'd kicked a pebble on the walk over. I could see the moment she decided that the card was probably a fake, or borrowed, or some kind of mistake. "I'll need to verify this," she said, moving to the register. The verification took 5 minutes. I stood there, holding the coat, watching her type into her computer, waiting for the machine to process. Around me, the boutique hummed with the quiet elegance of expensive things. The classical music played on. A woman in designer everything tried on a silk scarf, holding it up to her face in the mirror, considering herself from different angles. When the transaction went through, I saw something flicker across the manager's face. Not quite relief, not quite apology, something closer to resentment, as if my ability to pay had somehow offended her. "Will that be all?" she asked, sliding the card back across the counter. "Yes," I said, "that will be all." She began wrapping the coat in tissue paper, quality tissue paper, the kind that rustled like it cost money. As she worked, she made conversation, the kind of strained small talk that people make when they're realizing they've misjudged someone. "It's a beautiful choice," she offered. "For a special occasion?" "For my wife," I said. "How lovely. I'm sure she'll adore it." But I could hear the lie in her voice. I could hear the calculation that had happened in her head. I was not the kind of person who would buy a coat from this boutique. I was not the kind of person who was supposed to be here. And even now that I'd proven I could pay, the wrongness of my presence hadn't been erased. It had only been confirmed as inexplicable. I took the coat, paid my $985, and left. The tissue-wrapped package felt heavy in my hands as I walked back to the subway, heavier than a coat should be. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. I'd bought the coat. Catherine would love it. This was what mattered. But something had cracked, just slightly. Some small wall between the world and me that I'd assumed was solid had revealed itself to be permeable, fragile. And I found myself thinking, as I descended into the subway station, that perhaps I should have paid more attention to how people looked at me. Perhaps I should have noticed this sooner. I didn't know yet that this small humiliation was nothing. I didn't know that by the time I reached my apartment, I would have far bigger problems to worry about. I didn't know that Catherine had left that morning for reasons that had nothing to do with her mother, and that the coat I'd just bought would still be in its tissue wrapping when the police arrived at my door 3 days later with questions about wire fraud, money laundering, and the disappearance of $87 million from my law firm's trust account. I didn't know yet that I was about to lose everything. Part 2. The Reckoning. The detective's name was Sarah Chen, and she arrived at my apartment on a Tuesday morning with 2 uniformed officers and a warrant. I remember the way the paper trembled in her hands, not from fear, but from the weight of what it contained. $87 million. Wire fraud, money laundering, and at the center of it all, my name. "Mr. Webb," she said, holding up the warrant as if it were a shield against my inevitable denial. "We need to ask you some questions about the Meridian Capital Trust account." I stood in my living room, the camel-colored coat still draped over the back of the sofa in its tissue wrapping. It seemed to mock me, a small, pathetic gesture of love in the face of a tsunami of betrayal. Catherine wasn't at her mother's. She never went to her mother's. Not for 16 years. Not for a single one of those third weekends. "I want my lawyer," I said, though the words felt hollow. I was the lawyer. Or I had been, until approximately 8 hours ago when the senior partners had called me into the conference room and told me that my career was over. The interrogation room at the precinct was beige and cold. Detective Chen placed a folder in front of me. Inside were wire transfer records, emails, bank statements, a paper trail of my own destruction. But as I read through them, something began to crystallize in my mind. These transfers, these accounts, these shell corporations, they weren't set up by me. The dates were wrong. The authorization codes didn't match my normal patterns, and the email address initiating the transfers was similar to mine, but not quite. A single digit different. "These weren't me," I said. Detective Chen leaned back in her chair. She'd heard this before. Every criminal said the same thing. But I kept reading, my fingers tracing the pattern, my legal mind finding the inconsistencies that my shocked heart had missed. "The Marcus Webb who signed these documents," I continued, my voice steady now, "isn't me. Look at the signature verification. The bank flagged 3 of these transfers. They're noted here, in the fine print of the compliance report." "Your name is on every document," Chen said flatly. "My name is on fraudulent documents," I corrected her. "Someone has been impersonating me, and whoever it is, they have access to my office, my email, my secure accounts. Someone inside my firm." It took 2 hours of explaining, of pointing out the digital fingerprints, the inconsistencies in handwriting, the impossible timeline. I'd been in meetings during 3 of the transfers, witnessed by the entire partnership. Slowly, I watched Chen's expression shift. Not quite belief, but something closer to uncertainty. "We'll need to verify this," she said finally. "Don't leave the city." I was released at 6 in the evening, my career in ashes but my freedom intact. As I walked out of the precinct, my phone rang. It was Thomas Blackwell, the managing partner. His voice was tight, controlled. "Marcus, the SEC just contacted us. The transfers match patterns from our senior compliance officer, Gregory Harrison. He's been flagging accounts for months, but nobody thought to check his own authorization logs." Gregory Harrison. I'd known him for 12 years. We'd worked on the Meridian account together. He had access to everything, and he'd been slowly, methodically, transferring money in my name while I was too distracted by boutiques and distant wives to notice. "Where is he?" I asked. "Gone. He cleaned out his desk 2 hours ago. We've frozen his accounts, but he had a head start." I hung up and stood on the sidewalk as the city moved around me. People walked past with their phones, their coffee cups, their small, intact lives. I thought about Catherine. I thought about those third weekends. I thought about a man who'd spent 12 years positioning himself to steal $87 million. And I realized something that made my blood run cold. Catherine knew. The apartment was silent when I returned. I went to my office, to my computer, and pulled up my email archives. Years of correspondence, searched for patterns. And there they were, hiding in plain sight. Emails between Gregory and Catherine. Not many, not obvious, but unmistakable in their intent. "The husband suspects nothing," one read, dated 3 months ago. "Mother's place works perfectly," another said. "He never asks questions." I sank into my chair. My wife, the woman I'd bought a camel-colored coat for, the woman I'd been trying to win back with a spontaneous gesture, had been part of this the entire time. She wasn't at her mother's. She was somewhere with Gregory, with the money, with 9 years of careful planning that I'd been too blind to see. The rage that came next wasn't hot. It was cold, surgical. I sat at my desk for 3 hours, pulling together every piece of evidence. Bank statements showing transfers to an account registered to Catherine's maiden name, credit card charges for flights booked under aliases, a deed of transfer for a property in Costa Rica, signed with Catherine's notarized signature, dated for the following week. They were going to disappear, and they were going to do it with my money, my reputation, and my entire life. I called my lawyer, a different lawyer, one who specialized in white-collar crime. Her name was Patricia Mills, and she'd been recommending representation to clients for 15 years. When I told her what I'd found, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You have everything?" she asked finally. "Everything," I confirmed. "Then we have them," she said. "Both of them." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Patricia filed papers, made calls, contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The detective assigned to my case, a different one now, a younger woman named Rodriguez, obtained a warrant to search Catherine's records. What they found was better than I could have hoped. Catherine had been sloppy with her burner phone. Better yet, she'd backed up her messages to the cloud. Years of correspondence with Gregory, planning, coordinating, laughing about how easy it had been to deceive me. He was always so focused on his work. I could hear her voice in those messages. He barely noticed when I started going out. He didn't even question it. By Thursday morning, the FBI had issued arrest warrants, but Catherine and Gregory were already gone. They'd fled the previous night, leaving behind a forwarded address that led nowhere. What happened next was almost theatrical in its timing. The boutique where I'd bought the coat called my lawyer. They'd seen the news coverage, my picture alongside Catherine's as a wanted suspect in the fraud investigation, though I was now cooperating fully with authorities. The boutique manager had realized, with creeping horror, that the man she'd treated with such dismissal was actually the victim in a much larger crime. She wanted to issue a public apology. Patricia advised against it. "Let the story tell itself," she said. But the story did tell itself. Within a week, every major news outlet had picked it up. The law partner with the wandering wife, the fraud scheme planned over a decade, the betrayal that made even hardened financial crimes investigators shake their heads. And at the center of it all, me, the man who'd been too trusting, too focused on his career, too blind to see what was happening in his own home. What nobody knew at first was that I'd been playing a different game. While everyone was looking for Catherine and Gregory, I was looking at the boutique. I'd gone back there on Friday, dressed differently this time. Expensive suit, polished shoes, the kind of careful grooming that suggested old money rather than new. The manager recognized me immediately. Her face went white when I walked through the door. "Mr. Webb," she said, her voice shaking, "I'm so sorry about—" "About how you treated me?" I said pleasantly. "About how you assumed I was a fraud because of how I was dressed. About how you made me wait while you helped your preferred clients." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I don't actually care," I continued. "I'm here because you witnessed something. I made a purchase in this store on a Saturday morning, approximately 4 weeks ago. I'd like to know if you remember it." She nodded quickly, eager to cooperate. "The coat, the camel wool, yes, I remember." "And do you remember how you treated the transaction?" I asked. "Do you remember flagging my credit card as fraudulent?" We have security protocols." "You were rude," I said simply. "You were rude to a man who was buying a $900 coat as a gift for his wife. A wife who was, at that exact moment, stealing $87 million from my law firm. While you were deciding whether I looked wealthy enough to shop in your store, she was wire transferring money to accounts in Panama." The manager's face was chalk white now. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, and I realized that my voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of the man who'd walked into this store 4 weeks ago. That man had been polite, deferential, desperate to prove he belonged. This voice was different. This voice belonged to someone who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "You're going to make a statement to the media about how you treated me. You're going to explain exactly how you judged me based on my appearance. You're going to name your policies that enabled that treatment. And then, you're going to donate $50,000 to a legal aid fund that helps white-collar crime victims recover their lives." "Mr. Webb, I interrupted. "I can have my lawyer file a civil suit for discrimination and emotional distress, and we can litigate this publicly. Your choice." She made a statement 3 days later. It went viral. The boutique was flooded with criticism, with calls for boycotts, with social media campaigns questioning their hiring and training practices. Within 2 weeks, the manager had resigned. Within a month, the boutique had rebranded its entire customer service approach, implementing new training protocols specifically designed to counter unconscious bias. It wasn't justice, but it was something. The real justice came 6 months later, when Gregory Harrison was apprehended trying to board a flight from Mexico City to Argentina. Catherine was arrested 2 weeks after that, found at a resort in Costa Rica under a false name. The FBI recovered approximately $63 million of the $87 million they'd stolen. The remaining $24 million became the subject of a lengthy civil suit that would probably never be fully resolved. Catherine was sentenced to 8 years. Gregory received 12. By the time my divorce was finalized, the papers had stopped writing about the scandal. There were new frauds, new betrayals, new stories of trust broken. Mine was old news. I didn't take the camel-colored coat with me when I left the apartment. I left it on the sofa where I'd placed it that first morning, a monument to my own naivete. The cleaning crew that prepared the apartment for sale probably threw it away. I like to think someone found it, brought it home, and wore it without knowing its history. That seems kinder than it deserves. What I did take was a clear understanding of who I was and who I wasn't. I wasn't the man who'd walked into that boutique 4 weeks before my life exploded. That man had been defined by what others thought of him, whether the boutique manager respected his taste, whether Catherine found him attractive enough to stay, whether his partners valued his work. I'd built myself out of other people's opinions, and it had left me hollow enough to be betrayed by the person closest to me. The man who walked out of my apartment, leaving behind my old life, was different. He'd been broken and rebuilt on his own terms. He didn't need a boutique manager's approval. He didn't need a wife who'd never really loved him. He didn't need a law firm that would have thrown him under the bus the moment the scandal became inconvenient. What he needed, what I needed, was something simpler. Clarity. Solitude. The kind of peace that only comes from knowing exactly what you're capable of and accepting it without shame. I moved to a small house upstate, outside of a town called Millbrook. My new practice is small, pro bono work mostly, helping people navigate divorces and fraud recovery. I work with former victims of financial crimes, people who've been betrayed the way I was, though usually with less money involved and more children in the balance. Last month, someone left a camel-colored coat on my office chair. It was expensive, with a silk lining, exactly the kind of coat that Catherine would have chosen. There was no note. I never found out who left it. But I hung it in my closet, and on cold mornings I wear it without thinking about what it represents. It's just a coat now. Just a thing I bought once when I was someone else. The woman at the boutique, the new manager, the one who came in after the scandal, she recognized me when I finally went back to that store. This time I was buying a winter coat for a colleague. The manager approached me immediately, her smile genuine, her manner respectful. She had no idea who I was, and I didn't tell her. I let her help me choose, let her wrap my purchase in tissue paper, let her thank me for my business without the weight of history between us. As I left the store, walking into the December afternoon with my coat in a bag and no particular place to be, I thought about that first Saturday morning 4 weeks before everything fell apart. I thought about the man I'd been then, desperate to prove something, to win something back, to be seen as worthy. He'd failed. But in failing, he'd become someone stronger, someone who didn't need anyone else's validation to know his own worth. Sometimes I think about Catherine. I wonder what her life looks like now, in whatever prison she's in, whether she has any regrets. I suspect she doesn't. Some people are fundamentally incapable of regret. They move through the world taking what they want, assuming they deserve it. And when they finally face consequences, they're always shocked by the surprise of it. I don't hate her anymore. Hate requires energy, and I'd learned to spend my energy more carefully. What I learned, what that cold November morning in the boutique had tried to teach me before everything else happened, was that the way people treat you when they think you're nobody tells you everything you need to know about them, and the way you respond to that treatment tells you everything you need to know about yourself. I'd responded by buying a coat anyway, by proving I could afford it, by needing their respect so badly that I'd done exactly what they expected, played the game, proven myself, accepted their judgment as valid. The version of me that walked out of my apartment 6 months later responded differently. When the boutique manager tried to apologize, I didn't forgive her graciously. I held her accountable. When the media asked for my reaction to Catherine's sentencing, I didn't perform grief. I spoke facts. When old friends from my law firm reached out with sympathy, I didn't accept their comfort. I moved on. That coat, the one in my closet now, worn and fading, it's become something different than what I intended it to be. It's not a symbol of my failure to see what was happening. It's not a monument to my blindness. It's just a reminder that sometimes the smallest moments teach the biggest lessons, if you're paying attention. And I'm paying attention now.